The first picture of a shapeshifter that we know of is from the Trois Frères cave in France, and it is a cave painting of what appears to be a man and a deer mashed together into each other. The reason why we can fairly confidently say it's not a deer or a natural animal is because it has toes like a man, horns like a deer, and forward-facing eyes like that of a man, and carnivorous eyes, which of course a deer doesn't have. We have been fascinated by shape-shifting into various animals and into other things for a long time, if you look back at our history of mythology and historical references and even our cave art. Over the years, that fascination has not lessened, as evidenced by the plethora of urban fantasy that feature various types of werewolves, werebeasts, werehyenas, and other things that change into things. And that is the topic of my video today. I am going to do a brief introduction to shape-shifting and how you can implement it in a fantasy world. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you like this kind of world building content, please do hit the subscribe button down below. If you like what I do here and you'd like to support my channel, you can hit my Ko-fi page, or you can buy my book, The Hidden Blade, link to both down below. I do have a world building community on Discord where we discuss awesome topics like how big would a plant have to be to generate the equivalent amount of energy as a human in order to become a plant person. And if you're interested in that kind of topics, join our Discord community, link down below. Enough of that, let's get cracking with today's video. First, what is a shapeshifter in this context? So I am defining a shapeshifter as anything that can transform its appearance either into another person, so a person becoming a person becoming an animal, or an animal becoming a person, or into an inanimate object. Famously, Futurama has a were-car, so of course it is possible. I also want to distinguish here between the psychological shapeshifter and the physical shapeshifter. The psychological shapeshifter is probably what was drawn on that cave wall. It is when a person believes that they turn into a werewolf or believes that they turn into a bear. And that belief makes certain physical alterations to their body, but it's not an actual change into a wolf or an actual change into a bear. Anthropologists speculate that those shamans who put that deer on the cave, they used to engage in rituals, including involving some local mushrooms that might or might not have had something to do with their belief that they could turn into deer. And these rituals were supposed to call the deer to them or disguise you when you're hunting the deer. But either way, it essentially psychologically turned these hunters into deer, allowing them to believe that they were better hunters. You see this kind of psychological shape-shifting as well in the Norse cultures. Specifically in Iceland, there was this belief that there were some warriors who could adopt the wolf or adopt the bear, and they were your berserk warriors, so they would go into the front lines and kill everything before them. And they would partake in these rituals as well, again with some local hallucinogenic product, and they would believe that they had become a wolf or a bear, and they would attack ferociously. This kind of psychological shapeshifting, while very interesting, is not the topic of my video today. Today, I'm going to talk about physical alterations as we see in fantasy worlds. If you'd like me to do a longer, more in-depth coverage of psychological shapeshifting and how you could use that, comment down below, let me know. But for today, let's focus our attention on physical shapeshifting. So first, when you're doing shapeshifting, there are certain general mechanics that you need to consider and questions that you need to answer. There is no right way to answer these questions. You just need to think about them and implement them in your world as you want to implement them. The first is what happens to clothing. You can absolutely have clothing be physical things that rip and tear as people change shape, because obviously their shape changes from a human. They bulk bigger, they go smaller, whatever the case is. And when they transform back into a human, they're naked because they've burst out of their clothing. This is the way that clothing is managed in a lot of werewolf films, but it is not the only way to manage clothing. In David Eddings's book, in the Belgariad series, where the sorcerer characters use magic to transform into animals, they somehow take their clothing with them into their animal forms. And when they come back into human form, they're clothed and all of their gear that they had with them was with them as well. So it depends on the nature of your transformation. If your transformation is much more physical in nature, much more kind of like you burst out of your skin and you bulk up and all of that kind of thing, then it makes more sense for the clothing to burst off you as well. It makes the change much more real, much more physical. If your change is more magic orientated, it's more of a mystical change, then I would lean in the direction of having your clothing be part of the transformation in some way. You can see that the same applies in Harry Potter, where the transformation again is very magical orientated. The clothes go with into the animal form. In fact, there's specific mention of Professor McGonagall when she transforms into her animagus. The glasses that she wears becomes markings on her cat's face, so you can see who Professor McGonagall is even by her clothing, which translates into cat form. Your second important question is what happens to all the extra mass? Now, what I mean is, if you transform from a human into an wolf, for example, or from a human into a bear, you might need to bulk up quite a lot of mass. And you might then need to lose that again when you go to a human. Or maybe you, as a human, transform into something much smaller. What happens to all that mass? Again, it's dependent on your type of transformation. So you could go heavy into the magic, in which case, like with your clothing, it just takes care of itself. Or it could be a more visceral physical change. And then you might have some kind of mystical element that happens to that mass. I don't like referencing Laurel K. Hamilton because her books have become softcore porn at this point. But in the early books, she built quite a nice urban fantasy setting around vampires and werewolves. And she had the werewolves, when they transform back into human, there's this ectoplasmic goo that goes everywhere. And I always assumed that that ectoplasmic goo was basically the spirit world, for lack of a better word, building the werewolf body around the spirit of the human that is the werewolf. My point is that you could have something like that where you have a physical component to the body that vanishes when you transform back into human, or you could have it all be purely magical and the mass doesn't matter. Then you need to answer questions about how long does it take to shift, how hard is it to shift, and are there any consequences for shifting forward and backward? For example, is it exhausting? Does it put a strain on your body? When you shift into the animal form, can you immediately think about being a human? Do you think like a human or do you think like an animal in the animal form? So those are all your general questions about implementing shapeshifting in your world. But let's take a look at some fantasy examples in broad categories of shapeshifting. First, we should discuss religion and shapeshifting. There are two religions that I want to draw on in this case. In the animistic religion of Japan, there are any number of creatures that have got special shapeshifting ability. The one I specifically want to talk about is the kitsune. The kitsune is a mischievous spirit in the Japanese animistic spirit tradition, And as they grow older and wiser, they gain more and more tails. They also learn how to transform themselves into humans, specifically into beautiful human women. So when you see a beautiful human woman all alone by herself late at night, you should assume that that is actually a kitsune who is out for mischief. And you will know that they are a fox either by checking for their tail because they have difficulty hiding their tails, or if they are scared of dogs, because all foxes are scared of dogs. Now, what we can see here is that the kitsune, despite transforming into a human, still has some fox-like behavior, being scared of dogs, still having the tails. And that is something that you can use in building your shapeshifters. How much does the animal form affect the human behavior? I again have to reference Laurel K. Hamilton because she did do a good job on this. She specifically had the animal forms affecting their behavior when it came to things like greeting each other. So they would greet each other by smelling behind each other's ears, sort of, or kissing each other on the cheek. And it's sort of a substitute for how some animals will greet each other by rubbing their heads together to exchange scent glands that are here in the corners of their mouths. So you can really lean into your animal behavior and then adapt that to what would be human culturally appropriate for that animal. The other religious aspect that I want to discuss just briefly is Zeus and the Greek gods. Zeus was a master shapeshifter. He turned into a bull and banged a chick, and that gave us the Minotaur. He turned into a swan and banged a chick, and that gave birth to Helen of Troy. He turned into another woman's husband to bang her. He once turned into a warm golden shower of rain. Don't think too long or too hard about that. Let's just move on. The point is that Zeus could turn into a lot of things, and in those shapes, he gave rise to many mythological monsters. So if you adapt into your world that kind of religious aspect where a spirit being can take many forms, but whatever their interaction is with humans, they can still engender a child, then you can populate your world with hybrid monsters, as I discussed in my video on hybrid monsters. If you enjoyed this discussion around religion and shapeshifting, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about magical shapeshifting. Magical shapeshifting is actually quite common. As I said, it's in David Eddings' Belgariad, it's in Harry Potter's Animaguses, it's in Harry Dresden, the Alpha Pack are magical shapeshifters. It's dragons in D&D, or druids for that matter, in their wild shape in D&D. I use it in my world in a human-to-human aspect, and I think it's the best example of one of its utility applications. So in my world, my main character, Louis, has the ability to change his face using his magic. And he carries with him a collection of hats. Each hat is associated with a certain personality. And as he puts on the hat, he remembers who that person is, he shapes his face into that person, and he adopts the persona of that person. This is a demonstration of shape-shifting as a means of disguising who you are. J.K. Rowling does the same thing with Sirius Black. It is a very nice utility magic to enable you to have a disguise that doesn't require you to put on hours of makeup and really change into somebody else. It's something that can be done on the fly, kind of like Superman running through the phone booth. And if you think that sounds like an interesting premise, check out my book on Kindle Unlimited or purchase it in the Amazon store, links down below. Magical transformation is normally not linked to the moon, but it can be linked to an item. It can be that your transformation is not actually an innate magic, but is instead an item that you use. Jim Butcher uses this in Harry Dresden, where he has magical belts that when you put them on, you turn into a wolf. This then becomes something that you can put in anybody's hands and they can use the item to become that animal. In that case, they can of course leverage it to hide, as I do, but they can also leverage shapeshifting to gain the attributes of the animal, better hunting ability, stronger muscles. Maybe they need to kill people being the animal and so on. So you can tie shapeshifting into an item. You can also have shapeshifting be associated with other people's magic. So in The Little Mermaid, the original fairy tale, she goes to the sea witch and asks for legs. She asks to become a human, and the sea witch transforms her into a human. Then eventually she fails at getting the prince to fall in love with her, and she asks to be turned back into a mermaid. And the sea witch says, well, kill the prince and then you'll be turned back into a mermaid. And she doesn't want to do that, so she leaps into the water and she becomes sea foam. She literally transforms into an inanimate object. So she goes through quite a transformational journey, physically speaking. So you don't have to have the magic of transformation linked into the person. You can use either items or other people's magic. And if you like this discussion of how to use pure magic to enable the transformation, hit the thumbs up button. And let's talk about curses. The most famous curse, of course, is the were creature curse. That's normally tied to the moon. You turn into a specific animal at the full moon, normally because you were bitten by a were creature, and that then caused you to catch this disease or this curse or whatever it is, and every full moon you turn into an animal. That animal is normally quite an angry animal, and it is rather uncontrollable around the full moon, or at least at first it's uncontrollable, and it leads to a lot of death and destruction and all kinds of angry things. You can, of course, have other kinds of curses. Again, looking towards our fairy tales, Beauty and the Beast was an example where Gaston is cursed by the fairy to be a beast because of his behavior towards her until he can get true love's first kiss and all the normal fairy tale things. Curses typically result in the shapeshifter not liking what they are. There should be angst involved in it being a curse. If it's just magic, it's fun to turn into your animal. I imagine the Harry Potter anima guy have fun, but Professor Lupin, the werewolf, he doesn't have fun. Why? Because his ability is not magic, it's a curse. So if you're going to use curse-based lycanthropy or cursed-based shape-changing, you have to bear in mind that you should lean into that angst. Your main characters should have drama. If they don't, well, it's not really a curse now, is it? If you like this discussion of curses, hit the thumbs up button. If you want me to discuss were creatures in more detail, let me know in the comments below. And let's talk about the last type of shapeshifter on my menu for today, the natural ability. So I want to talk about a few creatures that have the natural ability to shapeshift, starting with a monster from India called the Rakshasa. According to Indian legends, Rakshasa were created from Brahma's foot. Other sources claim they are descended from Pulstaya or from Kasa. Legend has it that many Rakshasa were particularly wicked humans in their previous incarnations. Rakshasa are notorious for disturbing sacrifices to the gods, desecrating graves, harassing priests, possessing human beings, and other various nefarious activities. Their fingernails are venomous, they feed off human flesh, they're monstrous beings. But they are also shape changers and illusionists. And as shape changers, they can assume various physical forms. And it is not clear in the legends that they have any actual physical form that is their own. That to me is a very fascinating concept, that a race could be so much a shapeshifter that they literally don't have their own shape. Anne McCaffrey leans into this a little bit with the Sassenach series. There's an alien race called the Weft that don't really have their own shape. They take human shape because they are natural shapeshifters. But in their natural state, they're just this mess of threads and knobs and strings and things all over the place. I think that that's a very interesting idea to play with. How would that affect your nature if you didn't have any permanence in your shape? What kind of culture would develop around that? That would be a very interesting question to answer in terms of the cultural development of your race of shapeshifters. The other shapeshifter that I want to talk about is the Selkie from Celtic tradition. The Selkie is a seal that transforms into a human when they exit the water. Of course, they transform into a pretty woman because somehow all mermaids are pretty women. It's just the way mermaids work, and the Selkie is the Celtic mermaid. So of course it transforms into the pretty woman. Anyway, moving on. The Selkie transforms into a woman and it leaves behind its skin. So it hides its skin somewhere. But it can't transform back into an otter or a seal, whichever one it is, without that skin. And this has resulted in there being somewhat of a tradition of, if you find the skin, you can keep it and you can make the beautiful woman marry you instead of going back to the ocean and becoming a seal again. It was into this myth that Catherine Kerr leaned when she created her water people, the Dwergi, in the Devery series. And there, again, it was that they transform and they leave their skins behind. But because people stole their skins, they became so paranoid that anybody who saw them transform into otters, in their case, they would capture those people and either kill them or keep them prisoners for the rest of their lives. No exceptions. Because anybody who knew about their existence represented an enormous risk to these people. And they became a very paranoid race of shapeshifters. So if you have your shapeshifters using natural abilities, it is worth thinking about things like, do they have a natural form? What effect does it have on them to be able to just change shape the whole time? And how paranoid are they about other people knowing what they are? And those are my thoughts on shapeshifters in fantasy worlds, how to build them and how to incorporate them. If you want me to cover any other aspects of shapeshifting, let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, you will probably enjoy my video on Urban Fantasy 101. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you soon for another one.